For those who can't wait to see the most mind-blowing horror movie, take it easy, because this time I will review and dissect a super scary movie called The First Omen, 2024. This movie is a prequel to The Omen, which is known as the story of the son of DAJJAL. And I can guarantee you, if the events in this movie actually happened in the real world, we would all get goosebumps. Okay, instead of taking too long, let's just get into the discussion. As always, if you like this channel, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, so you don't miss out on other interesting content.
I told you not to look for me.
The movie opens with a scene of a priest named Brennan making a confession to a priest and detective named Harris. During the confession, Brennan shows a photo of a baby and says that there is a group of people who have perverted the baby. Despite its appearance, the baby was not a real human being. He was born through a perverted ritual and has now grown into a teenager. The people were just waiting for the right time to carry out their dark plan. But after Brennan said all that, Father Harris suddenly lost it and said that he could no longer continue this investigation.
Father Harris!
Outside the room, Harris made it clear that he would rather die than be further involved in this horrific crime. Oh my. Because of the incident, Pastor Harris's bald head hit a metal pipe and almost cracked.
Father.
But what exactly were they talking about? We are transported to Rome, Italy, in 1971, where a charming young sister named Margaret has just arrived. She has the noble task of serving in one of the churches in Valentino Rossi's home country. Upon arrival, she is picked up by a priest named Gabriel, who is assigned to welcome her. Shortly afterwards, Margaret was introduced to a church official named Lauren, who seemed very happy to welcome the new sister. After a short conversation, Lauren immediately invited Margaret to leave for her place of assignment.
Just want to explore.
Isn't it beautiful?
On the way, Margaret was surprised by the sight of a massive demonstration taking place on the streets. Lauren explained that recently there had been a lot of protests from workers, because their salaries were cut by 3% for a savings program that was considered unreasonable.
City.
Arriving at the church complex, a senior sister named Silva took Margaret for a tour. During the room tour, Silva explained that the church has a special facility in the form of an orphanage that cares for girls, even equipped with a delivery room prepared for the birth process. After Margaret admired the facility, Silva introduced her to a young nun named Angelica.
Sister Angelica.
As it turns out, Angelica is an orphan who grew up in this place since childhood. Not long after, they hear the cries of a small child, which makes Silva rush to check on her. As Silva leaves, a curious Margaret hears a strange noise from one of the rooms. As it turned out, inside the room, there was an unusual-looking teenage girl.
Oh, there you are. Behaving yourself, Carlita.
Carlita's strange behavior made Margaret curious. She asked Silva why Carlita had to be separated from the other children. Silva explained that Carlita was undergoing disciplinary punishment for making noise and breaking the rules. Shortly after, Silva told Margaret that she would be escorted to the mess or her temporary residence by a man named Brother Luca. Later that evening, Margaret arrived at her room. It was so quiet, it seemed that her roommate was not there. She decided to tidy up her luggage first.
In the power of evil. It is good to exit.
After finishing tidying up, Margaret prepared to sleep. She prayed first before resting. However, she was suddenly startled by the sound of wails from outside, but it turned out to be an auditory illusion. Not long after, her roommate returned. An elegant woman with a typical urban Italian style. She casually changed her clothes and introduced herself as Luisa. They made small talk before retiring to bed. The next day, Margaret was seen learning Italian with the children at the orphanage. The atmosphere was warm and pleasant. However, in the midst of this togetherness, Margaret noticed Carlita, who seemed very quiet, like a child who had closed herself off from the outside world. Later that night, as Margaret was watching the children getting ready for bed, she noticed that Carlita's bed was empty. She immediately went looking for her. During her search, Margaret felt strange when she saw the nuns gathered in a room and doing something secretly. She also felt uncomfortable when Sister Rainbow looked at her with a mysterious expression.
There you are!
The tension increased when Luisa suddenly appeared and invited her to go somewhere. But before leaving, Luisa asked Margaret to change her skincare first. Apparently, Luisa is a true party girl who loves to go out and dance at nightclubs. When she sees Margaret looking less than confident in her barely there dress, Luisa immediately takes her hand and invites her to a nightclub called Ozono's DAJJAL that is popular in Italy. Once there, Luisa unceremoniously handed Margaret the local liquor. After a couple of glasses, they started to feel lighthearted and got lost in the music. Two men approached them and joined in the dance. Margaret, who was getting carried away, was invited by one of the men named Paolo to have another drink. As her drunkenness progressed, Margaret lost control of herself and her faith. The impulses of desire and temptation that were previously locked up tightly, now slowly opened up and began to dominate. The next morning, Margaret woke up in a mess. Her body was covered in cold sweat and a huge sense of guilt. She immediately asked Luisa what exactly happened last night. Luisa just chuckled and explained that Margaret had gotten so drunk last night that she had made out with Paolo. Hearing this, Margaret felt very sorry and filled with guilt for having fallen into sin. Still in a state of shock, she sat brooding in the churchyard. Not long after, she was visited by Father Brennan, who warned Margaret to be wary of a child named Carlita, because darkness and evil often lurked around her. When Margaret returns to her duties with the children, she finds it strange that Carlita is nowhere to be seen. One of the children told her that Carlita was locked up in the punishment room. Alarmed, Margaret went straight to the place and met Sister Silva, asking for Carlita's release.
Do you want to talk about why they put you in that room?
Some time later, Margaret tried to calm down Carlita, who was looking increasingly depressed and moody. However, in the middle of their conversation, Margaret was startled by a loud scream from the delivery room. She immediately went to the source of the sound and was surprised to find that one of the sisters was in labor. The suspense peaked when Margaret saw a demonic hand coming out of the laboring nurse's womb. Unable to look any longer, she fainted on the spot. Moments after regaining consciousness and undergoing examination, the priest said that the incident was common for new sisters who were not used to seeing labor. He advised Margaret to calm down and distract herself by playing with the children. When she went to visit Carlita again, Margaret saw something unexpected. Angelica, an orphan raised by the church, was having a serious conversation with Carlita. The sight immediately made Margaret even more suspicious and wondered what was really going on in this place.
Margaret.
Haunted by her growing curiosity, Margaret finally decided to meet Father Brennan. She wanted to discuss Carlita and all the irregularities she had witnessed at the orphanage. Showing him a photo of a baby, Margaret said that she was sure the baby in the photo was Carlita, who was surrounded by several nuns with suspicious expressions. Brennan sighed heavily, then revealed a shocking truth. The place where Margaret worked actually housed two churches, one of which was a heretical church. The church, he says, has long been obsessed with giving birth to the DAJJAL, an evil figure they believe will be their instrument of power. Now, they were convinced that Carlita was the chosen child who would give birth to DAJJAL, as she was born on the 6th hour, 6th day, 6th month, the number 666, often associated with the devil. Margaret is incredulous at the confession, and her shock is compounded when Brennan asks her to infiltrate and search Carlita's birth records to prove everything. Overcome with fear and confusion, Margaret decides to flee the place. But in the midst of her inner escape, curiosity strikes again. She finally asked Gabriel where the archive was kept. But Gabriel looked nervous and said that they couldn't talk right now, because Sister Silva was watching them secretly at the museum. Meanwhile, Carlita was beginning to feel annoyed by Margaret's constant following of her. Margaret, who felt the time was pressing, then invited Carlita to speak privately. In a quiet and anxious voice, Carlita finally opened up. She admitted that she often felt haunted by evil feelings, sometimes even seeing scary visions. Margaret tried to calm the girl down by telling her that when she was Carlita's age, she had also experienced similar things. However, as she grew older, she realized that they were just hallucinations. But Carlita insisted with a serious look that what she was feeling now was very real, and not just a false image. She warns Margaret that grave danger is approaching.
Carlita. 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 I'm sorry.
There you are.
And they must leave immediately as angry protesters have already begun rioting outside the gates of the home. When the atmosphere at the orphanage heated up due to a huge riot from demonstrators angry about the fraudulent savings case, Margaret was busy evacuating the children to safety. However, in the panic, she got separated from the group. Amidst the deafening chaos, Margaret began to feel as if she was being followed by a terrifying, invisible figure, a dark, demon-like shadow lurking behind the crowd. Later that night, Margaret was summoned by Sister Silva to discuss something important. In a serious tone, Silva informed her that Margaret's vow-taking process would be postponed. Hearing this, Margaret was clearly surprised and suspicious, especially since the reason for the postponement was not explained in detail. As the argument heated up, Silva suddenly warned Margaret to stay away from Carlita, with a sharp gaze that held something. Margaret was even more suspicious that there was a big secret being hidden from her. On her way home from the meeting, Margaret saw Paolo standing alone on the side of the road. She approached him, intending to ask him something. But as soon as she reached Paolo, Margaret was puzzled. Paolo's face looked very pale and full of fear. With a trembling voice, Paolo simply said that he didn't know anything, and then begged Margaret to check for any cuts or marks on his head. The horror intensified when, from a distance, Margaret witnessed a drunken man brutally attack Paolo, throwing his body with the force of an Ultimate Johnson move. Paolo's body was sent flying into the street, and he cried out for help as he felt parts of his body disappear from the waist down.
You ready?
A few days passed after the traumatic incident. Margaret started trying to get back into a routine. She was seen accompanying the children, who were preparing for the nuns' vow-taking ceremony, a sacred ceremony that she had been looking forward to. A feeling of disappointment enveloped Margaret's heart when she realized that she was not going to be made a nun. She could only watch the ceremony from a distance, with her chest tight with questions. But curiosity began to overcome her, especially after the strange events that continued to haunt her mind. In the middle of the ceremony, Margaret snuck up and tried to investigate something that had long made her suspicious. She felt something odd about one of the walls, specifically the wallpaper that looked asymmetrical. Upon closer inspection, she found a hidden keyhole. Carefully, she opened the door, which turned out to lead to a secret room in the basement. With rushed breath, Margaret began rummaging through shelf after shelf, looking for the mysterious birth archive that Father Bernard had mentioned. After a while, she found it, the secret documents that recorded Carlita's birth, complete with shocking irregularities. Wasting no time, Margaret grabbed the files and rushed out, intending to show Bernard everything.
Come with me. Come. Okay, you go to the...
In the midst of her escape, she had wanted to take Carlita with her, but unfortunately, her movements had already been monitored by Silva and his loyal followers. Margaret whispers to Carlita that she will try to save her from this hellish place. But before the plan could succeed, chaos broke out again, and in the midst of the chaos, Margaret discovered the horrifying truth: a strange mark resembling a demonic symbol like a Sharingan was clearly visible on Carlita's gums. Later that night, while trying to close her eyes, Margaret heard a strange and sinister whispering voice. It kept calling her name, telling her to open the carpet in the corner of the room. Trembling, she follows the voice, and once again, strange shadows begin to appear around her, as if a dark truth is ready to swallow her whole. In a state of panic, Margaret tries to calm herself down, convinced that everything she is experiencing is just an illusion, just a shadow triggered by fear.
We have to go.
Fortunately, Gabriel arrives just in time, saving her from the clutches of darkness. Gabriel takes Margaret away from the cursed place, taking with him the secret documents that had previously been hidden. Arriving at Bernard's rented house, Gabriel handed over the documents and in a serious tone said that they had just escaped from the panty controlled by a cult group. Without wasting time, they immediately opened and examined the contents of the document. To their surprise, they discovered that this cult had been trying to give birth to the DAJJAL for a long time, but their attempts had always failed. According to records, every baby born from the ritual was always a girl, whereas what they needed was a boy as the perfect vessel for the devil. Fernando began to suspect, perhaps, that they were now trying to mate ritualized girls with demonic figures, to create male offspring as successors to the darkness. Margaret began to connect the dots, feeling that something was not right with the baby photos Bernard had found. He was certain that the baby in the photo was not Carlita, because the demon mark on Carlita's body was located on her gums, not on her head like the baby in the photo. This meant there was still another child, one who was most likely the original vessel of the male demon they were looking for. Quickly, they sifted through the documents again and found one strange File A birth document without a photo, which was highly suspicious.
Why do they all look like this?
And that's when Margaret has a flashback about Paulo, who once freaked out and asked her to examine the mark on his head. Things start to make sense. Margaret, who once thought the events at the Ozone Club were just another drunken party, now realizes that the night wasn't just a stupid night out, it was a ritual surrender to a cult who have made her part of their dark spiritual plan. The bitter truth is finally revealed. Margaret herself turns out to be a demon child who has unwittingly been the object of an illicit marriage with a dark entity. Hearing this, Bernard immediately examines Margaret's head, and sure enough the demon's mark is there. This proved that the baby in the photo was not Carlita, but Margaret herself. Bernard began to put the pieces of the mystery together in his head. He realized that Carlita was just a backup plan insurance in case Margaret's marriage to the devil failed, since Carlita was too young to carry the DAJJAL. Now Bernard and Gabriel were really panicking. They know that today is the 6th of the month, a number that is very synonymous with the symbol of the devil, 666. This could mean that the time of DAJJAL's birth was very close, and Margaret was the key to all this. Wasting no time, they decided to take Margaret to a doctor, hoping to stop DAJJAL's pregnancy before it was too late. But on the way, they realize that a mysterious car is following them. As if not wanting to look suspicious, the car slowly turns away. But just then, Margaret experienced severe and uncontrollable nausea. Whether it was the effects of a demonic pregnancy, or some other supernatural disturbance, the situation became even more chaotic. Suddenly, their driver lost control. The car crashed into another motorist. Although the accident was quite serious, Margaret still managed to survive. But shortly after that, something even stranger happened. Just as they were all recovering from the accident, officials from the cult church showed up, as if they knew where Margaret was. They immediately took her away, evacuating Margaret to continue with the birth plan. Margaret finally woke up in a dark ritual room full of demonic symbols. There, all preparations have been made to give birth to the baby of darkness. Lauren, one of the key figures of the cult, appears and says that Margaret is a special girl chosen directly by the devil as the womb to give birth to the DAJJAL. Without giving her a chance to resist, they quickly drugged Margaret, preparing her for the heretical labor that was about to begin. Upon arrival at the specially prepared labor room, the devil worshippers began to launch their crazy plan, to perform a cesarean section at exactly 6 a.m., the time believed to be the perfect moment for the birth of the DAJJAL. Tension enveloped the room. All the worshippers seemed to be holding their breath, praying in a frenzy, hoping that the baby born would be a boy, a figure said to be an incarnation of the devil.
What is it, a boy or girl?
As the operation progressed, shocking news emerged. It turned out that the babies Margaret was carrying were twins. One of them was female, and the other, male.
A boy.
This news was greeted with cheers of joy and tears of emotion by the cult, as if the world had handed over its Lord to them. Margaret, who was beginning to wake up from the anesthesia, was in a weakened state, begging to see the baby she had just given birth to. When she was finally given the chance to gaze upon the baby, Lauren expressed her gratitude and praise, as Margaret had successfully given birth to the future ruler of darkness. But as the days went by, Margaret's consciousness began to fully recover. She began to feel disgust and horror at what had been forced upon her. She knew she had to put an end to all of this, even if it meant sacrificing the demon baby she gave birth to. Unfortunately, her resolve was not strong enough. Her body was still too weak, and her mind was in turmoil. In the midst of that dilemma, Margaret experienced immense pain, exacerbated by the presence of her roommate who had now been completely lost in the demon cult. She seizes Margaret's last chance to act. As the situation spiraled out of control, Silva arrived. He gathers everyone and orders his followers to erase all traces, burning the place, Margaret, and the demon baby. But as the flames begin to spread, they don't realize something. Carlita was sneaking in. With unexpected courage, she tries to save Margaret, who is struggling to keep a baby girl, not a demon baby. Having successfully obtained the demon seed, the cultists decided to burn the demon's body because, according to them, the creature was no longer useful. He was just a tool, and now that tool has been thrown into the flames. Meanwhile, in a car traveling in the dark of night, Silva and Luz receive special orders. They were tasked with delivering a baby boy, the devil's son, to a high-ranking American official, under the pretense of adoption. But of course, everything was set up. The baby is not actually given away, but rather monitored in secret, as part of the cult's grand plan for its continuation. At the maternity hospital, a cunning collaboration between the hospital and the cult was established. The official's baby is secretly swapped with DAJJAL's, in the hope that the future Lord can grow up in a system of great power. The demon baby was given a new identity, living as an ordinary human being, but in a body that contained great darkness.
Baby, you're supposed to eat them.
5 years later, things have changed drastically. Margaret now lives peacefully with Carlita and her daughter. Their humble home is filled with warmth, like nothing ever happened before. But the calm is shattered when someone comes knocking on the door. Turns out, it's Bernard, who is still alive, despite nearly dying in an accident 5 years ago. "Margaret, they know you're alive. And they know about your son," he said softly, but with stress. He warned Margaret that the cult was not finished yet, and they could come at any time. Before leaving, Bernard mentioned one name that struck Margaret.
Damien.
Yes, it's the name of the demon boy Margaret gave birth to, who is now being raised by a high-ranking official in America. And as all the pieces of the story began to come together, one harsh reality was revealed. All along, the demon's main target was not Carlita, but Margaret. This was all part of Silva and Lauren's master plan, and with the help of Special and Paolo, they managed to get Margaret to go off the rails and forcibly mate with the devil. In the end, Margaret gives birth to twins, a girl she raises on her own, and a boy named David, who now symbolizes an uncertain future, a dark future. Now, the question is, what will the future hold for the demon child, David? And, will Margaret be able to face the return of darkness? Wait for the latest video for part 2 of this movie. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss part 2.